It's good to be back in New England. My family, we moved here in 1999 and planted Daybreak Community Church in Colchester, Vermont. And we were here for 10 years and then moved to Los Angeles for 10, Boulder, Colorado for 5, planting churches and working with church planters. And we had just moved back to Vermont 5 months ago, and we live in North Vermont in a little town, a little village called Waterville. And we are planting Waterville Country Church. And as Sandy said, I am serving part-time with the BC&E, Baptist Churches of New England, working with pastoral development, pastoral care, pastoral leadership development. And it's wonderful to be here tonight. This is our second webinar with Kaitlin and Allison. It says we have representatives from Wisdom Over Wealth. We have friends from Wisdom Over Wealth. Allison and Kaitlin, Allison Michaud and Kaitlin Salsbury. And they're going to tell us a little bit about themselves, and then they're going to jump in and tell us a little about Wisdom Over Wealth. But before that, just a passage from Proverbs that I think is very appropriate for this topic and for our guest. Proverbs 8, verse 10 says, "Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold, for wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her." So I'd like to welcome Allison and Kaitlin.
Thanks. Good to be here, Robbie. Well, I think to get started, let's introduce you to who Wisdom is, so you know a bit about why it's important that we're here, and then Allison and I can share a bit about ourselves and then get into the nitty-gritty of what we have to talk about. Wisdom Over Wealth, we're a CPA ministry. We partner with churches and nonprofits to see the kingdom advanced, which I think everybody on this call is looking to see happen. But specifically, we want to see the kingdom advance through righteous and practical financial solutions. We want to partner with churches, nonprofits with our wisdom, our knowledge, and our skills to help you be the most successful that you can be. Help churches to steward the money and the resources that God has given them. We offer a variety of services, church and nonprofit payroll, accounting solutions, personal tax prep, financial statement preparations, 990s and 990Ts, and a bunch of other things. We like to deal with the details so that churches can focus on really reaching people for Jesus. Our team is made up of 11 individuals with church financial experiences. All 11 of us have personal faith walks with Christ. 2 are certified public accountants and 2 are licensed ministers. We focus on accounting so that churches and clergy can do ministry.
Well, hi, I'm Allison Michaud. I've been working for Wisdom for 6 years. When we had to put the number in for how many years it was, I didn't realize it was that long. That's when I came. My daughter was born, my oldest daughter, and that felt like yesterday. So I'm glad to have been with Wisdom for 6 years, and the time has flown by. I started at a Big 4 accounting firm. I specialized in taxes, personal taxes, entity taxes. I did just about everything, but then have been really focused on the church world and nonprofit accounting since coming to Wisdom.
And I'm Kaitlin Salsbury. I've worked for Wisdom for 9 years, which also was a little bizarre to figure out that was the number. Prior to working for Wisdom, I provided accounting and reporting support at a denominational office in the Northeast, actually. And I did church accounting, church books, and reports for both large and small churches. I hold my Bachelor of Arts in Ministry and Bible. And I personally right now oversee our payroll team and some of our different accounting that we do. So my experience has been much more specific to churches over all of the years that I've worked, which now it's probably close to, 12 or 13 years with church-specific bookkeeping. So that's a little bit about who Wisdom is and who we are and why we were here today putting on this webinar. We have 3 specific objectives that we have for tonight. And so the first is that we want to provide the basics of clergy compensation. So just a baseline of what that looks like. What are the components that make up clergy compensation? The second is to explain clergy taxation. And the third is to give an overview of clergy taxes. As Sandra mentioned, throughout, we tried to put some sections for us to do short Q&As, and we hope to end the night as well with maybe a little bit longer of a Q&A time so that we can make sure that we answer your questions. So as we're talking, if you're like, wait, how does this apply here? Or what does this mean here? Put that in the chat, like Sandra said, and we'll take moments to answer those. If we don't get to them and they're in there, we can probably get those and offer some sort of answers at a different point going forward. So let's get into it. Clergy compensation. So we always have to start with a definition because in the church world, we think minister and we think of a certain things, but the IRS actually is very specific about what they mean by a minister. I think we'd all agree that there's a lot of people within our church that minister to each other, but they may not be technically licensed clergy or clergy in the sense that we're talking about tonight. So the IRS, when they say a minister or clergy, this is someone that they see as licensed, commissioned, or ordained, where they're employed to provide ministerial services. So there's kind of two parts to this. One, licensed or commissioned. This normally includes some sort of training. Sometimes it's a training within a church, but there's some sort of process that they go through and knowledge that they gain through that process for them to be able to be called licensed or commissioned. The second part of that has to do with ministerial services. So I really love this idea of sacerdotal duties. I like to use that phrase a lot because I think it's really fun, but really it just means that you're engaged in duties such as preaching, sharing communion in a group setting or individually with people, other forms of ministry, going to visit people who are shut in. I think you all could probably give a list of what ministry looks like, but that you're actually living out the duties, not just using the title. And so the IRS really considers two-part, that you are licensed and commissioned and that you're actively engaged in, employed to provide those services to be considered clergy when it comes to the compensation and taxation we're going to talk about. So there's a couple of main aspects of clergy compensation. The first one is clergy salary. Salary is taxable for both income tax and SECA. So I did want to explain, like, when we talk about SECA, because we do mention it throughout pretty much our whole webinar, we're talking about the Self-Employment Contribution Act. So many people know about FICA, and a lot of you guys are bivocational. So, or all of you are bivocational, either or. So you'd know at your regular job, whether you go work at a shoe store or a grocery store, or you're an accountant, hey, whatever you do in your day job, right? When you get your pay stub, you would see your hourly or salary rate, and then you would see taxes like Social Security and Medicare calculated. That's because you are as a regular employee, a non-clergy employee, part of your taxes is FICA. FICA is the Federally Insured Contribution Act. 15.3% goes towards Social Security and Medicare. But of that 15.3, there is an employee and an employer, so the person that you work for, pays into FICA. For clergy, that's not the case. The full 15.3% that goes towards Social Security and Medicare is under the Self-Employment Contribution Act. And that full 15.3, instead of half of it, becomes a tax burden on the individual. So as a bivocational individual, you would have your regular compensation that would be taxable for FICA, and you'd have only half of Social Security and Medicare being calculated and withheld from yours. But on your clergy pay, you would be responsible for all 15.3%. So we're going to continue to talk in a little bit about what it means that clergy are considered part of this self-employment contribution or self-employed, and then how does that look on your taxes. The second type of compensation that we've got is clergy housing. So housing has a couple of different things that are included in it. There's cash housing, there's in-kind or parsonage housing, there's a combination of both, but that is only taxable for SECA. So it's not taxable for federal income tax. You've probably heard somebody tell you that housing is tax-free, a tax-free compensation. When they say that there's an asterisk there should be an asterisk next to it that says that they're only talking about, or they should only be talking about, federal income tax, because there is actually a tax that gets calculated on housing. Some other parts of compensation: bonuses, pastor appreciation, gifts, benevolence, all of those should be treated the same as salary. So if you're receiving a W-2 from your church for a part of your compensation, and there's an amount in box 1, that should include any bonus, gift, pastor appreciation, any check that you're receiving that is not a reimbursement, or one of the non-taxable we'll talk about in a second. That should be treated the same as salary and should show up in box 1. There are a couple of other types of clergy compensation. Fringe benefits is what they're called. And there are taxable fringe benefits and there's non-taxable fringe benefits. So taxable fringe benefits are medical reimbursements that aren't part of a qualified plan, personal use of a company car. So if your church owns a vehicle that you use and you drive, the personal use of that car, if any, is actually taxable. And these items are taxable for income tax and SECA. So again, these are also treated the same as salary. There are a couple of non-taxable fringe benefits. If your church has a qualified group health plan, again, if it's qualified, then it's a non-taxable fringe benefit. There are a couple ways of having group health plans that are not just offering health insurance. So a qualified small employer health reimbursement arrangement, or a QSERA, or an ICRA. I think that's individual coverage health reimbursement arrangement, I believe is what that stands for. Either of those are non-taxable fringe benefits, but they have to be specifically set up to be that way. Also, cell phone allowances are non-taxable fringe benefits. So there are a couple of other benefits that are not just the normal salary or housing, and they, depending on where they land, some are taxable and some are non-taxable. Realize I just threw a whole lot of information at you. So the first thing I'd like to do is that we have a clergy compensation pyramid. This is a form or a document that we've put together to try and help individuals begin to understand the change in your compensation from non-taxable to taxable. We think that this is often helpful for churches, even when they're looking at wanting to compensate clergy and saying, how do we do this in the most tax beneficial way? So you can use this and it actually builds from the bottom up. So it's the least taxable, meaning no tax, to the most taxable to clergy individuals. On your screen, there's a QR code, but I believe we also are going to share a link. Perfect. So you can go ahead and do that. It'll take you to our it'll take you to Dropbox. I had to think about where that was, where you can download that directly. And it does have notes of level 1 tax-free, level 2 tax-free, level 3 only for SECA, level 4 SECA and income tax. So there's different items on there. So we do want to kind of expand on when I talked about housing allowance. Most people know what a salary is, so we don't feel the need to give you a lot of detail there, but it is helpful because we have found that oftentimes people have a partial understanding of housing allowance. So housing allowance can be, like I said, in kind, which means that you're receiving a good, not cash. That's what in kind means. You can do an in-kind donation to your church, and that means you gave your church an actual, like a chair or well, I was going to say a bed, but that would be weird for you to donate to your church. Or a sofa. We'll do that. Or a sofa. You gave something tangible and you could then claim that on your taxes. Well, an in-kind compensation is the same thing. They gave you a good, which would be like a parsonage or an apartment that they own, and they gave you that benefit for compensation. That's what in-kind means. So if you see that in our slides, that's what we're talking about. So in kind or cash, that means you're getting cash. You're getting a check, or it's getting direct deposited. You're actually getting check. Or you can get a combination of both of those. The reason why you can receive like the combination, a parsonage allowance with cash, is because of what is all included in housing. So, it was on the slide I was on. Sorry about that. Housing allowance includes your rent or mortgage. So rent of a house or an apartment, your mortgage for that, or what that would be for a parsonage. So what the value of the parsonage that you're receiving, that you're living in, what the value of that would be.